Hey there, and welcome to Planet Echoes. Tonight we stand beneath a sky that may not only be watching us, but measuring us. The question has been whispered in scientific halls and spoken more openly in the quiet corners of conspiracy. What if Earth itself is under surveillance? Not by satellites we can see, not by governments we name, but by something older, stranger, and infinitely more patient. The arrival of objects like Oumuamua and 3I/Atlas seemed like random visitors at first, drifting through our system as wandering stones. Yet their timing, their angles, the very precision of their entry raised a thought that clings like frost. Were these things sent here? And if so, who is watching through their silent eyes? When I stood beneath the desert night of Morocco, the stars seemed like teeth, pressed into the dark, 1,000 cold gazes staring back. Astronomers had said Oumuamua was just a shard, a fragment flung from a distant system, a cosmic accident that tumbled end over end across the void. But as I traced its improbable trajectory in the archives, I felt the shape of intention. It moved not like debris but like reconnaissance. Its slingshot past our sun so perfectly aligned, its escape so quick, as though it had only paused long enough to look at us, and then it was gone. There is a cruelty in the idea of being observed without knowing the purpose. Children once feared monsters under the bed not because of what they could see, but because of what remained hidden in the dark. Now, in the silence of interstellar space, we find ourselves children again. If these objects are probes, they are old beyond imagination, devices launched before our species could write its first myths, perhaps even before Earth carried humans at all, which means the Watchers are not merely ahead of us, they may be waiting. I've often asked myself what a civilization capable of sending such scouts would want with us. Resources, curiosity, or something colder, a cataloguing of life before it is erased. Some argue that if they meant harm, they would have struck already. Yet I wonder, what if the strike has no need to be rushed? To a mind that spans millennia, we are insects pinned beneath glass. And insects do not need to be crushed at once. They can be studied first. The Sahara was once a sea of green, fertile and live. Civilizations bloomed there before the sands devoured them. Some left traces, others vanished so cleanly that only myths recall them. I think of that when I hear the whispers of observers above. What if what happened to those vanished empires was not the work of drought or war, but the closing of an experiment? What if we are not the first to be watched, and not the first to be measured for endurance? The question gnaws deeper when I recall the second object, 3I/Atlas. Its entry angle mirrored Oumuamua's too closely, its velocity uncanny. The odds of two interstellar wanderers arriving in quick succession, both detectable, both brushing near our cradle, are staggering. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps fate, or perhaps something much colder. When I close my eyes, I imagine them as eyes themselves, black mirrors sliding past, each one drinking in the light of our world, archiving, comparing, preparing. And so the unease grows. If Earth is under surveillance, then the real mystery is not whether we are seen, but why we are still left alive. No farmer stares at a field forever without acting. No predator follows prey endlessly without the strike. So what are we to them? Amusement, study, or simply a test waiting for its conclusion? The stars do not answer, but their silence feels heavy, deliberate, like a stage waiting for its final act. And in that silence, one question remains. What exactly have they been watching us for? The question has never left me, and perhaps it never will. To ask it is to admit a terrible possibility, that our lives, our civilizations, our wars and our triumphs might be nothing more than a performance stage for distant eyes. The weight of that thought is suffocating. When I wander ancient ruins, I can't help but see them differently now. Broken walls are not only scars of human folly, but perhaps reminders that someone once stood where we stand, observed until they no longer mattered, and then, quietly, their story was erased. The small twist that unsettled me most came not from dusty ruins, but from maps. Maps older than our histories, drawn by civilizations we barely understand, showed coasts and rivers with a precision that should not have existed. Places that no cartographer of their age should have known. Could it be that they were copying from something not of Earth at all? A survey given to them, or glimpsed, by the very watchers we fear now. I remember holding one such reproduction in a dim archive. The parchment smelled of dust and rot, but the lines drawn upon it were sharp, confident. It displayed Antarctica not as an icy wasteland, but as land free of ice, rivers flowing, valleys open. Knowledge we only confirmed with satellites in the modern age. How could they have known unless they were shown? And who would show them if not the same forces who now send their silent interstellar objects through our skies? It is said that the Sahara once bloomed with rivers that rivaled the Nile, that lush valleys stretched where dunes now choke the horizon. Skeletons of fish still lie beneath the sands, preserved like delicate bones in a tomb. Once there was life abundant here, and people who built homes and left stories painted on cavern walls. But the speed of its transformation into desert still troubles me. Was it truly only climate, or did the watchers close a door on that world as deliberately as they opened it? Sometimes I think the earth itself holds memories of what came before us, but it whispers them so faintly that we doubt our ears. Every collapsed city, every vanished tribe, every myth that tells of fire falling from the sky, these could be fragments of surveillance records, not in books or machines, but etched into the scars of the planet itself. And if so, perhaps we are walking unknowingly in the ruins of previous experiments, each one terminated when its usefulness ended. I recall the way the astronomers dismissed Oumuamua at first, calling it a rock, an accident. But even some among them whispered privately, its shape was too unusual, its light curved too perfect, as if it reflected like a shard of metal. If it was a machine, then it was a quiet one, built to never betray itself openly. I wondered then, what if it did not simply pass us by, but left something behind? What if even now, deep within some canyon or trench, a fragment of its survey sleeps, still transmitting, still listening? The unease cuts deeper with every question, and I realise the danger is not only in being watched but in being catalogued. For what purpose does one catalogue life, if not to decide what must be kept and what must be discarded? Our arrogance makes us believe we are special, unique in the cosmos. But if these watchers have seen 1,000 Earths before ours, then to them we are merely another entry in a long list. And perhaps the truest fear is not that we are watched, but that we are ignored, that our entire existence is but background noise in someone else's theatre. To live under surveillance is one thing, to be deemed unworthy of more than a glance is something colder still. And so the question turns again, heavy as stone in my chest. What if we are not the first to be watched? And what if we will not be the last? That sentence lingers like smoke in my mind, curling into every thought I try to escape into. If watchers have turned their gaze on us before, perhaps in ages when stone tools were the height of human invention, then it changes the way we must think about our history. Maybe what we call myths were not stories at all, but memories, records of earlier observations carried through generations in the only way those people could preserve them. Consider the flood myths that echo across continents. Civilizations separated by oceans, all told of waters rising, of skies split by thunder, of survival for a few while many were swept away. It is tempting to imagine this as mere allegory for nature's cruelty. But what if it was not? What if those floods were orchestrated events, resets triggered by those silent observers who decided the experiment had drifted too far? To test resilience, perhaps, or to clear the board for something new? When I walk through the library of Alexandria's ruins, or rather what remains after fire and conquest reduced its grandeur, I could not help but imagine what knowledge was deliberately erased. Were there records of earlier encounters hidden there? Descriptions of objects in the sky? Sudden changes on Earth? Did someone, or something, prefer that we forget. And here lies the quiet, soft twist, some of the oldest carvings. In Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, even in the caves of southern Europe, depict not only animals and men, but figures that do not belong. Elongated shapes, objects hovering, lights painted in ochre and coal long before humans learned to smelt metal. At first glance they are dismissed as symbols, art without explanation. Yet once you carry the thought of surveillance in your mind, the carvings shift in meaning. They look less like imagination and more like documentation. Psychologists often speak of the human need for narrative, the instinct to make stories to explain what we cannot understand. Perhaps these ancient artists saw something vast, mechanical, unearthly, and painted it the only way they knew how. What they could not name they recorded as presence, and then generations wove it into legend. If this is true, then watchers did not only arrive in our lifetime. They have always been here, returning, circling, leaving, and coming back again to measure the latest version of humankind. But if watchers have come before, then what happened to those earlier witnesses? Why are their voices only preserved as echoes? Did the observers erase them, or did humanity's fragility erase itself in the face of forces too immense to resist? It is one thing to know we are watched. It is another to realise we might only exist because we have not yet failed the test given to those before us. I think about the Sahara again, the way it hides ancient riverbeds beneath the dunes. Scientists have traced them with radar, lines of water that once nourished cities we no longer remember. Could those cities have been part of the same cycle of observation and silence? If watchers catalogue life, maybe they also erase it when it no longer serves their interest. Like curators of a vast eternal museum, they might clear exhibits that have grown stale, making room for the next. And so, the unease sharpens. Maybe history is not linear at all. Maybe it is cyclical, rising and falling not by our own hands alone, but by theirs, by the unseen keepers who decide how long each age should last. If that is true, then what is happening now? Are the interstellar objects signs of another evaluation, another weighing of our worth? The thought chills me more than silence itself, because it suggests that everything we build, every cathedral, every satellite, every fleeting human dream, could one day be swept into sand again at the flick of a decision not made by us. And if that decision is coming, then the real question is no longer whether they are watching, but what judgment they are preparing to deliver. That question rattles in the hollow places of my mind, as though an echo has been left there by something beyond me. If these watchers are truly measuring us, then perhaps our fate is already sealed. But fate has many faces, and not all of them are death. Some are stranger, more complex. What if their judgment is not about destroying us, but about reshaping us? Not a punishment, but a course correction. A hand guiding the fragile experiment back onto rails we cannot see. The first major twist of this story emerged when I came across records of unexplained anomalies in ancient strata, layers of earth that should have spoken only of geology, but instead revealed something uncanny. Embedded within rock millions of years old were patterns, metallic traces, shapes that should not exist. Mainstream science dismissed them as natural coincidences, artifacts of pressure and mineralization. But to eyes sharpened by suspicion, they looked like remnants, fragments of devices so ancient they predated even humanity. Could these have been earlier probes, machines sent by the same watchers, buried by time until their mission was complete? I cannot escape the memory of one particular report, from a remote coal seam in Russia, where miners uncovered what appeared to be a perfectly crafted wheel encased in stone. The wheel, fragile and incomplete, crumbled when exposed to air, as though it had waited too long in the dark, and yet photographs were taken, drawings made. It was not a trick of nature. It was something built, something left behind. If that is true, then the watchers have not only passed by, they have touched this world directly, leaving traces in the deepest veins of its body. The implications clawed at me. If their judgment has already fallen before, then maybe Earth has been altered again and again, subtly moulded by unseen interventions. Civilizations rise, then fall. Ecosystems flourish, then collapse. Each time we tell ourselves it is chance, climate, war, disaster. But what if all of these are nudges, adjustments by a presence that does not wish us gone, but never allows us to truly be free? In the quiet hours of the night, when sleep escapes me, I imagine Earth as a classroom. We are the students fumbling through lessons, some learned, most forgotten. Above us, unseen, stand the teachers, silent and watchful. They grade us without speaking, and when we fail, they erase the chalkboard and make us start again. Floods, deserts, plagues, fires, all different forms of erasure. The Sahara could have been one such test, its rivers cut away like sentences struck through on a page. What haunts me is the sense of communication without words. The Watchers never declare themselves, never descend openly. Their messages come in forms we mistake for accidents. An interstellar object, a sudden shift in climate, a plague that reshapes the balance of life. If judgment is coming, it may not arrive in a form we recognise as deliberate. It will come disguised as the natural order, but behind it will linger intent. And yet, a darker possibility gnaws beneath the surface. What if judgment is not collective, but individual? What if they do not watch humanity as a whole, but measure each of us separately, sifting through billions of lives like data points in a vast calculation? In such a vision, none of us escapes. Every dream, every cruelty, every kindness is weighed. Perhaps the reason we feel eyes on us at night when no one is near is because we are never truly unwatched. I do not know which possibility chills me more, that they might end us in a single sweeping gesture, or that they are already inside every moment, judging, measuring, waiting for a signal we cannot hear. And if their judgment is already being written, what place do we hold in it? The words strike me with the weight of confession, as though they were whispered not from my own lips, but from the depths of the earth itself. If we are being judged, measured, or guided, then what role are we truly playing? Are we the architects of our own destiny, or merely actors repeating a script written long before our first breath? The more I pursued this question, the more the first major twist of my journey revealed itself. The Watchers may not be distant at all. Their presence may not be limited to interstellar objects or buried anomalies. Instead, they may already be interwoven into our stories, into the fabric of myths and religions that have shaped humanity since its beginning. Everywhere I looked, from Sumerian tablets to Mayan codices, I saw the same pattern. Beings descending from the sky, beings who judged, beings who measured and guided, beings who vanished only to return. Were these not simply gods imagined by desperate men, but visitors, the very same surveyors we suspect still circle above us? In Sumer, they called them the Anunnaki. In Mesoamerica, they were feathered serpents and shining lords. In the deserts of North Africa, figures with elongated skulls and strange eyes appeared again and again in carvings. Some call these coincidences, the shared impulse of humans to look upward and dream. But I wonder, what if those dreams were seeded by encounters with the same intelligence that now sends cold shards like Oumuamua across our path? If that is the case, then the Watchers are not merely surveyors. They are teachers, judges, and executioners all at once. Their hand is invisible, but not absent. They may have set the course of civilization, nudging us toward agriculture, architecture, language itself. And then, when we strayed, they may have wiped the slate clean. Flood myths, desertifications, plagues. Could these have been punishments, or simply resets? The psychological weight of this realization is suffocating. To believe we shape our own fate is comforting, even in the face of chaos. But to imagine that everything, every empire, every invention, every collapse, has already been accounted for in the plans of another, strips us bare of meaning. We are then not creators, but experiments. And experiments do not get to choose. But another question arises like a shadow against the wall. If they are our teachers, what lesson are they waiting for us to learn? Why have we been spared, generation after generation, while others before us were erased? Is there threshold, a moment in which we will prove ourselves worthy or unworthy of continuing? I recall an old legend told by the Dogon people of Mali, who spoke of visitors from the Sirius star system long before modern astronomy confirmed the details of Sirius B, an invisible companion star. How could they have known this, unless it was told to them, not as myth, but as knowledge passed down by beings who had come from the sky? And what did those beings want? They did not conquer, they did not destroy. They instructed, then departed. Yet instruction itself implies purpose. What curriculum do we belong to? As these thoughts took root, I began to feel the eyes upon me in ways I cannot explain. Not metaphorical, not abstract, but heavy, deliberate, as though when I raised these questions something turned its attention closer. Late at night I found myself watching the skies not in wonder but in suspicion, scanning for patterns in the stars, for movements too precise to be chance. The silence of the heavens is not empty. It feels staged, like an actor who refuses his cue until the audience grows restless. And here is where the twist deepens. What if the watchers have already revealed themselves, but we fail to recognise it? What if the strange phenomena we dismiss, lights in the sky, unexplainable objects, sudden bursts of knowledge in our past, are their way of speaking, testing, gauging our awareness? If that is true, then maybe their judgment is already written, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to see it. And if it has been written, then the next question is terrifying. How much longer will they let us continue before they deliver their final verdict? The words haunt me like a clock ticking in the background, each second dragging us closer to a judgment unseen. It is not the silence that unsettles me most, but the timing, the precision of when these interstellar visitors appear. Oumuamua in 2017, Atlas in 2019. Objects that should statistically take eons to stumble across our solar system arrive almost back to back, brushing close enough for us to notice. That does not feel like randomness. That feels like orchestration. I think about how predators move in nature. A lion does not strike the moment it sees its prey. It watches first, circling, measuring strength and weakness. Only when the pattern is clear, when the prey shows itself vulnerable, does the predator move. Could this be the same with us? Are these objects scouts, patient observers marking our trajectory as a species, waiting for the moment when judgment is most efficient? And then comes the more disturbing thought. Maybe they have already acted before. What if the collapse of civilizations was not simply a matter of human folly or natural disaster? The fall of the Maya, the sudden disappearance of advanced cultures in the Sahara, the unexplained endings of empires that should have endured. What if all of these were verdicts quietly delivered? One civilization erased, another given a chance, over and over like test subjects in a grand experiment. There are nights when I swear I feel the weight of this theory pressing into me. The stars no longer twinkle like points of beauty. They glare, cold, unblinking, unmerciful. In that endless gaze, I imagine files, records, archives of countless worlds. Earth is but one page in their vast collection. When they look at us, do they see promise, or do they see failure already too obvious to ignore? Once, deep in the caves of Lascaux, I stared at those ancient drawings, bison and stags painted by hands tens of thousands of years ago. Yet in the corner of one chamber, a strange abstract form lingered. Lines and circles impossible to mistake for mere hunting imagery. I wondered then if those cave dwellers too had seen something in the sky, something that demanded they mark it down before it vanished. A watcher, perhaps, moving above their fires, leaving behind not destruction but memory. Every 150 words or so, the question gnaws deeper. What would surveillance even mean on a planetary scale? To watch billions of lives unfold day after day, century after century, requires not only patience but intention. It implies data gathering, evaluation, and above all, purpose. They are not watching idly. They are not cosmic tourists admiring a view. They are studying us. And when study ends, what comes next? Perhaps that is why the timing of their arrivals matters so much. Oumuamua arrived just as humanity began peering seriously into interstellar space, building instruments capable of noticing the unnoticeable. Atlas followed just as our technological expansion was exploding exponentially, satellites surrounding our planet like a metallic skin. The Watchers came precisely as we became aware of them. That cannot be coincidence. That feels like a test. Now that you can see us, how will you respond? I think of ants watched beneath a magnifying glass. They scurry, they panic, they build frantically, unaware that the hand holding the glass can end their entire world in a flick. We are those ants. Our rockets, our telescopes, our nuclear weapons, all of it. Ants waving their antennae at giants who will not be moved by the noise. And yet, within this imbalance, one thought claws at me. If we are indeed being judged, maybe the verdict has less to do with power than with character. Maybe it is not our weapons or machines they measure, but something subtler. How we treat one another, how we build, how we destroy. Perhaps the true surveillance is moral, not technological. And if that is the case, then we are already standing trial every moment of our lives. The question that burns now is not whether we are watched, but whether we are worthy of survival. The phrase repeats in my head like a bell tolling from some unseen cathedral, echoing in places where silence should live. Survival is not something we think of as conditional. To us, it is instinct, inevitable until death proves otherwise. But to imagine that survival itself might be a verdict handed down from unseen judges, that transforms everything. Suddenly the wars we fight, the greed we display, the cruelty we allow, may not only destroy us by our own hand, but also weigh upon scales held by beings we cannot see. I think about history again, about Rome at its height, a civilization of grandeur, brutality and brilliance. Its armies conquered the known world, its architecture defied time, its culture spread like wildfire. And then, almost suddenly it fractured and fell. We explain it in books with words like corruption, plague, invasion. But what if those were only the surface reasons? What if deeper, invisible forces decided the experiment of Rome had run its course? If so, then judgment has always been with us, moving in patterns too vast for most to notice. A chilling thought creeps forward here. What if the Watchers are not one species or one intelligence, but many? What if Earth is observed the way scientists study animals in the wild, with different teams measuring different aspects, their reports converging into a verdict? Some may focus on our wars, some on our art, some on the ways we love and betray each other, and when their reports align, the final decision is made. To us, it would look like chance. To them, it would look like conclusion. And yet, there is something strangely intimate in the idea. When I walk through a crowded street, I wonder if the eyes I feel on me are not only human. When I look into the night sky, I imagine not stars but apertures, cameras older than we can comprehend, lenses aimed at us across light years. I wonder if every act of kindness, every cruelty, every whispered lie, every sacrifice is recorded. What kind of species are we really when viewed without illusion? Every 100 or so steps in my thought, a question rises that refuses to be silenced. If we are truly under moral surveillance, then what is the standard being applied to us? Is it survival of the strongest, as we once believed? Or is it compassion, endurance, cooperation? We build machines that reach for other planets, but we struggle to feed our own. We unlock secrets of the atom, but use them to kill rather than to heal. If the Watchers weigh contradictions, what story do they tell themselves about us? I return again to Oumuamua, that silent messenger tumbling through the dark. Scientists measured its brightness, its trajectory, but no one measured its silence. Silence itself can be an answer. It came, it watched, it left. No contact, no explanation, no acknowledgement. That silence may have been the first part of our verdict, a note written into some cosmic ledger. They saw, but they didn't understand. And what of Atlas? Its path mirrored Oumuamua's too closely, like a repetition, like a teacher repeating a question the student failed to answer the first time. If so, then perhaps we're already being tested again. Each interstellar visitor could be another chance, another evaluation. Each silence might be a mark against us. The psychological weight of this thought nearly crushes me. It means that nothing we do is meaningless. Every choice, every cruelty, every mercy ripples outward beyond Earth, beyond time, to watchers who may decide if we remain or vanish. It is a terrible, humbling possibility that the universe has already seen countless civilizations rise and fall, judged and erased, and that we are next in line. And so the question grows heavier still. What if survival is not our right, but a privilege we have yet to earn? The words feel less like a question, and more like a warning, one that lingers in the silence between heartbeats. We are so certain of our permanence, so convinced that progress guarantees continuation, yet the universe offers no such promise. If watchers are real, then perhaps survival is conditional, a contract we have not yet signed but are constantly negotiating with every act we commit as a species. When I walk among ruins, I see them differently now. Stones are not just reminders of what once stood, they are verdicts written in dust. Civilizations that failed the test left behind only fragments, their voices silenced, their ambitions reduced to rubble. What terrifies me most is the possibility that their watchers were the same as ours, patient, eternal, unchanging. Perhaps those civilizations too thought they had endless time. Perhaps they believed survival was a right, only to discover too late that it was not. I think of Atlantis, a story dismissed as legend, yet too persistent to vanish. Plato's words described a great civilization destroyed not by chance, but by sudden, deliberate catastrophe. For centuries we've argued whether it was allegory or memory, but if it was memory, whose hand delivered the blow? A rising sea, a falling fire, an unexplainable shift in the earth. These might not have been natural events, but calculated corrections, the closing of a chapter by those who had been watching all along. And so another thought intrudes. Maybe the watchers are gardeners, and we are the plants. A gardener waters what grows, prunes what is diseased, and uproots what threatens the rest of the garden. To the plant, this may seem cruel. To the gardener, it is simply care. If the watchers treat worlds like gardens, then civilizations are only temporary blooms, nurtured until they fail to serve the greater balance. The Sahara may have been such a pruning, its rivers cut away, its people erased, leaving behind only bones beneath the sand. But gardeners too have preferences. They do not prune aimlessly. What are the traits they value? Is it intelligence, creativity, survival against odds? Or is it harmony? The ability to coexist with the environment without consuming it whole. If the latter is true, then our chances are already slim. We scar our planet daily, strip it of forests, choke its skies with smoke, poison its seas with plastic. What verdict does such behaviour earn us when written into the cosmic ledger? Rolling hooks tighten their grip here. What if the watchers have already spoken, and we are simply too blind to understand? Could our strange bursts of evolution, our sudden leaps in knowledge, be their hand guiding us? Could our collapses, our forgotten ages, be their hand correcting us? Each twist of history then becomes less human and more orchestrated. We think ourselves authors of fate. But what if we are only characters written into a story told across stars? And if we are characters, then the fear grows sharper still, because every story has an ending. Not all endings are tragic, but neither are they guaranteed to be kind. A story can be cut short. A story can be rewritten. At night, I sometimes imagine a great archive, a cosmic library where Earth's record is stored alongside countless others, shelves stretching into infinity, filled with worlds catalogued, studied, judged. Some shelves gleam with records of civilizations that passed their tests and perhaps joined the watchers themselves. Others lie dark, dusty, forgotten, the civilizations they described wiped clean from existence. I wonder where Earth's volume rests on that shelf. Is it still being written, or has it already been closed? And this thought takes me back to the most unsettling possibility of all. If survival is indeed a privilege, then perhaps the verdict has already been made, and we are simply living through the final chapters before the curtain falls. The thought gnaws at me like a worm in the spine, leaving me unable to separate fear from inevitability. If we are in the last act, then every moment, every invention, every conflict we now face is less a choice and more a countdown. Yet, in that countdown, the watchers remain silent, their gaze fixed, their verdict unspoken. Silence is its own cruelty. It does not reveal whether we are being granted time to change or merely time to prepare for the end. It was under this weight that I began to revisit the stories of sudden endings, not the slow declines of civilizations, but the abrupt, almost surgical removals. The Indus Valley, once thriving, collapsed with no single cause historians can agree on. Its cities abandoned, its people dispersed. The Olmec too faded into mystery, leaving colossal stone heads as their only monuments. Were these natural collapses, or were they verdicts delivered swiftly and without explanation? Rolling hooks sharpen the thought further. If we are now being watched, then perhaps the watchers are waiting for us to notice them fully. Not just astronomers calculating orbital paths, but humanity as a whole acknowledging the gaze above. What if awareness itself is part of the test? To recognise you are being observed changes behaviour. It shifts choices. Maybe they are waiting to see whether our awareness leads us to humility or to hubris. Yet I cannot shake the feeling that evidence of their presence is everywhere, disguised as accident. Consider Tunguska in 1908, a blast so immense it flattened forests across Siberia, yet left no crater, no trace of impact. Scientists call it a comet or asteroid, but what if it was something else? A demonstration perhaps, a quiet warning, a reminder that power can fall from the sky at any moment, unseen until it arrives. Who would such a message be meant for if not us? The psychological toll of such questions is immense. I find myself wandering streets wondering if this entire world is no more than an exhibit, our skyscrapers and wars and songs laid out like dioramas for distant observers. And if that is true, then are we not already trapped? To exist in a cage, even one as vast as Earth, is still to be caged. What freedom is left if every step, every mistake, every kindness is noted, weighed, measured against an unknown standard? Still, another layer of unease twists through me. What if judgment is not uniform? What if some among us are chosen to survive while others are marked to vanish? The watchers might not erase species wholesale, but sift them, separating strands of humanity for purposes we cannot fathom. Could our diversity, of culture, of thought, of spirit, be the very reason we are so carefully studied? And if so, which strands will they choose to preserve, and which will they discard like failed experiments? The Sahara returns to my thoughts like a recurring dream. What if its desert sands are not merely the work of climate, but the residue of something larger, something erased with precision? Beneath the dunes, radar has revealed lost rivers and hidden structures. What if those are not ruins of human making, but remnants of something older, something the watchers destroyed to make way for us? If Earth has been prepared like a stage, then perhaps we are not the first actors to perform upon it. Each question adds another stone to the weight pressing against my chest. And always, the silence of the stars feels heavier, not empty but deliberate, like a pause before an answer too immense to bear. If this truly is the last act, then our ignorance will not save us. Awareness will not save us. Only one thing will matter, the verdict itself, when it finally arrives. And so the question sharpens to a blade. When the watchers decide, will they choose to erase us, or to let us continue? That question has become the axis of my thoughts, the turning point upon which everything else spins. For so long, we believed that extinction would come from within. Our wars, our greed, our neglect of the fragile world beneath our feet. But what if that belief itself was a blindfold? What if the truth is that the final decision will never be ours to make? The second great twist in this story is the realization that erasure is not abandonment. The city wasn't abandoned. It had been erased. When I look at histories that vanish too neatly, patterns emerge. Ancient settlements that once thrived, surrounded by rivers and fertile land, suddenly gone without trace of war or famine. Places like Göbekli Tepe, deliberately buried by the very people who built it, as though hiding something too dangerous to leave exposed. Or Mohenjo-Daro, where skeletons lay in the streets as if struck down by an invisible force, their city left perfectly intact yet forever emptied. Archaeologists speak of disease, of migration, but whispers remain that something else, something larger, intervened. And then I ask myself, who benefits from such disappearances? If the Watchers truly observe, then perhaps erasure is their way of cleaning the record, wiping experiments that no longer serve the purpose. A civilization removed so the next may flourish, like deleting a failed draft of a manuscript. Not abandonment, not neglect, precision, calculation. The terrifying part of this thought is its coldness. Natural disasters have chaos, randomness, cruelty without purpose, but erasure feels different. Erasure feels exact, deliberate, as though every stone toppled and every life extinguished was not random but accounted for. The city of Mohenjo-Daro did not collapse by accident. It was struck from the record. This second twist reframes everything. If abandonment were the truth, then survival would be in our hands. But if erasure is deliberate, then we are merely waiting for a choice we cannot influence. A species held in suspension, like words waiting for a reader's approval before they are published. And yet the silence of the stars still presses questions. If they can erase, why have they not erased us yet? We have destroyed forests, poisoned seas, split atoms into weapons capable of ending millions. Surely such actions earn erasure. Unless erasure itself is not punishment but conclusion. Perhaps the Watchers do not act in haste, but wait for the moment when the data is complete, when the experiment has shown everything it can show. We are not erased because we are not yet finished. Psychologically, this realization splits me in two. Part of me feels despair, to think our future lies outside of our hands. Yet another part feels awe, because it means that even in our smallest moments, something greater is paying attention. Every word spoken, every kindness given, every cruelty unleashed may ripple into the verdict of whether we are worth preserving. What if the Watchers are not gods in the sense we once believed, but archivists, collectors of civilizations, curators of knowledge? When they erase, it is not destruction but preservation in another form, moving what was here into another place we cannot reach. Perhaps those civilizations are not gone, but stored, preserved in ways we cannot imagine. What we see as erasure may be relocation. Still, for us left behind, the experience would be indistinguishable from annihilation. Whether stored or destroyed, to vanish from the earth is to vanish, all the same. And now the haunting question takes on its sharpest form yet. If Earth itself has been erased before, civilization swept clean like chalk from a slate, how close are we now to being next? The question rings like a silent alarm, a whisper at the back of the mind that no one dares speak aloud. For centuries we have measured time in years, decades, empires. Yet to beings who watch across millennia, our entire history is the flicker of a match. If erasure has happened before, then our own turn could arrive not in centuries but in a single heartbeat, without warning. The thought pierces through me, not with panic, but with a deeper, more gnawing dread, the dread of being insignificant in someone else's design. It is here that the story shifts inward, toward the psychological weight of this realization. Imagine for a moment that your every choice is not only your own, but also data. judged and recorded by observers who never speak? Would you live differently, knowing your smallest kindness or cruelty could tilt a verdict on whether humanity continues? I find myself questioning things I never did before. A dropped piece of trash, a cruel word spoken in anger, even thoughts I dare not admit aloud. All feel suddenly heavier, as though eyes I cannot see are watching each moment, deciding what it says about the whole of us. And yet, even as this paranoia deepens, another truth presses forward. Humanity does not behave as though it believes it is watched. We kill for borders, we hoard wealth, we devour the very earth that sustains us. If these actions are tests, then surely we are failing. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the Watchers want to see what happens when freedom collides with survival. Do we choose unity, or do we collapse into conflict? The experiment may not be about our brilliance, but about our morality, measured in the crucible of scarcity and desire. It strikes me then that myths of divine judgment may have always been echoes of this greater reality. Religions across the world speak of gods who watch, who weigh the deeds of men, who decide fates in silence until the final reckoning. Is it possible that these stories were never invention, but memory of encounters with the Watchers themselves? What we called gods may have been the same archivists who now send interstellar messengers past our sun, quietly checking if we are ready for the next chapter. The psychological toll of this is profound. I wake at night with the sense of being examined, my thoughts unravelling under a gaze I cannot escape. In dreams I stand in vast halls of light, walls alive with symbols I cannot read, as figures beyond form weigh me with eyes that are not eyes at all. They say nothing, they only watch. I wake gasping, and the silence of my room feels less like peace and more like surveillance. And yet, in those same moments of dread, I find a strange intimacy in the thought. To be watched means we matter. If we were nothing, they would not bother. Observation itself implies value, even if it is conditional, even if it leads to erasure. It means that in the vast indifference of the universe, someone, something, has decided that we are worthy of attention. That thought, dark as it is, offers a glimmer of meaning in a cosmos otherwise deaf to our cries. But then the darker shadow follows. Attention is not always mercy. A farmer may admire his flock, may even care for it, but he still slaughters when the time comes. To be watched does not guarantee safety. It may only guarantee that when the time for judgment comes, it will be swift, precise, and undeniable. And so, I return to the same chilling refrain. If others have been erased before us, if their civilizations were struck clean, as though they never were, then all that remains is the question of when our own curtain will fall. The phrase loops inside me like a drumbeat, slow and steady, until I can no longer separate fear from inevitability. Curtains fall at the end of plays, and perhaps that is what life itself has been. A performance staged under the gaze of an unseen audience. We convince ourselves we are free, but the stage is built, the script already moving forward. What role do we play if not the tragic actors destined for applause or silence at the end? This is where the psychological descent deepens. To live believing the curtain may fall at any moment is to carry a constant tremor beneath the skin. Every step feels temporary, every laughter fragile. I find myself staring at children playing in the streets, their laughter piercing the air with such innocence, and all I can think is, what will their eyes see when the Watchers decide? Will they inherit a world allowed to continue, or will they vanish like voices snuffed out mid-sentence, their lives ending before they even understand what life is? I have often tried to console myself by imagining that the Watchers are benevolent, that their silence is not indifference but patience. Perhaps they are waiting for us to prove something more than survival, waiting for us to show compassion, unity, the kind of growth that cannot be measured in machines but only in spirit. Yet the darker side of me whispers that such patience has limits, and that patience itself may already be wearing thin. If they have erased before, then they will erase again. The cycle is not a question of morality, but inevitability. The mythologies of countless cultures begin to shimmer with new meaning. the Mayans, who spoke of cycles of suns, each world destroyed before a new one was born, the Hindus, who described yugas, ages of humanity rising and falling under cosmic law, even the Norse, who foresaw Ragnarok, not as a simple end, but as the cleansing before a rebirth. Were all these merely human imaginations or encoded memories of something older? Perhaps the Watchers have always been part of our story, their cycles woven into myth to prepare us for what is to come, and in that preparation lies the most painful truth. Maybe we have always known the curtain would fall. Maybe deep within, humanity has carried the memory of endings, the quiet knowledge that civilizations are only temporary scenes in a greater drama. We hide this knowledge in stories, in religion, in ritual, but when we strip it bare, the same message repeats. Endings are not optional, they are scheduled. The more I dwell on this, the more the silence of the cosmos feels deliberate. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of judgment. When you sit in a courtroom and the judge studies you, they do not speak until the verdict is ready. That is the silence I feel now, each night under the stars. The Watchers are not gone. They are waiting, weighing, deciding. And yet there is a paradox I cannot escape. If the curtain is destined to fall, then why do we still create, still love, still dream? Why do we build cathedrals, write symphonies, reach for the stars with trembling hands? Perhaps this is the answer the Watchers are looking for. Not our perfection, but our persistence, the refusal to stop singing even when the stage is closing around us. If survival is not our right, perhaps beauty is, perhaps love is. Perhaps these are the arguments we offer when our case is weighed. But then the thought strikes me like a dagger. What if beauty, what if love, what if all of it is irrelevant to the verdict? What if the curtain is already falling and we are too deep in our performance to notice? That thought cuts more sharply than any blade. If the end has already begun, then everything we call progress, every machine we build, every city we raise, is nothing more than the scenery of a stage destined to collapse. The unsettling part is that endings rarely announce themselves until it is too late. A tree rots silently for years before the storm finally snaps it in half. A civilization decays unseen before the final blow arrives. Perhaps we too are already rotting, unaware that the Watchers have marked us for removal. I cannot help but think of signs, omens scattered across history that seemed meaningless in their time but now appear like warnings, plagues that reshaped entire populations, wars that erupted with no clear reason but ended empires, natural disasters so precise in their devastation they felt almost targeted. The eruption of Thera that crippled the Minoans, the Black Death that reshuffled Europe's destiny, the sudden freezing of the younger Dryas. Were these accidents or adjustments? Subtle strokes of an editor's pen trimming a script too long? And then comes the whisper of paranoia that will not leave me. What if the Watchers do not only erase civilizations, but also shape the minds within them? How many thoughts are truly ours, and how many are planted seeds meant to steer us? We imagine inspiration as divine, art as human, but could the greatest ideas, agriculture, mathematics, even writing, have been nudges from above? If so, then our very creativity is not ours alone, but a test. A performance guided by invisible hands. This realization shakes me at my core, because if they can plant, they can also prune. Entire generations may have been silenced not by famine or sword, but by decision. Whole cultures might have been directed into collapse because their trajectory no longer served the purpose of the experiment. The Watchers, in this sense, are not simply observers, but curators, guiding the flow of our history the way one arranges artifacts in a museum, and we, blind to their hand, mistake fate for chance. The psychological burden of this is unbearable at times. It means that every act of human brilliance, every flame of genius may have been lit not by us, but by them. And if that is true, then what remains of our identity? What does it mean to be human if the boundaries of our thoughts have always been shaped by unseen minds beyond the stars? We believe we own our destiny, yet perhaps we have only ever been participants in a script written before we learn to speak. And yet, another image pierces me. Perhaps the Watchers are not cruel at all, but compassionate in ways we cannot yet comprehend. A parent does not always explain their guidance to the child. The child only sees restriction, rules, corrections, without understanding the love that lies beneath. What if these Watchers are guardians, protecting us from ourselves, shaping us until we are ready for something greater? In that sense, the curtain may not be falling in destruction, but rising again in transformation. But then, how do we tell the difference? How do we know if we are being led toward ascension or toward annihilation? Silence gives no answers, only possibilities, and perhaps that is the cruelest part of all, that we will never know until the moment arrives. As I look again to the skies, I feel it more strongly than ever, the sense that eyes are there, unblinking, patient, as though watching not just civilizations but individual lives. My own fear, my own questions, my own fragile hope, all part of the record being written. And so, I am left with the most unsettling question yet. If the curtain is already falling, then how much of our story remains before the lights finally go out? The question grips me tighter than any other. Every civilization believes it has more time, that tomorrow will arrive, that the sun will rise again. Yet what if the lights we rely on, not just the sun, but the lights of history, of continuity, are already dimming? If the Watchers are real, then maybe they have already begun closing the book, one page at a time, while we still believe the story stretches endlessly ahead. This thought forces me into an uncomfortable intimacy with the past. When I study the ruins of vanished empires, I can almost hear their final questions echoing through the stones. Did the last citizen of Pompeii know the eruption was more than accident? Did the final scribes of Alexandria sense the fire that consumed their library was not only human cruelty, but part of a larger hand sweeping knowledge from the earth? Did the last farmers of the Green Sahara realize that their rivers had not dried by chance, but had been taken? If so, what terror must have filled them, knowing the lights were going out and they were powerless to stop it? The psychological spiral deepens here. I find myself imagining what the last day of our own story might look like. Not a single catastrophic explosion, not a meteor splitting the sky, but a gradual dimming. Systems failing without reason. Crops refusing to grow. Communications breaking down. Not chaos, but silence. The kind of silence that feels arranged, deliberate, as though the lights above are being turned off one by one until only darkness remains. And yet, within this fear lies a strange, almost tender thought. If we are being watched, then perhaps the story is not ending, only shifting into another form, like a play finishing one act before the curtain rises again for the next. What if death itself, of individuals, of civilizations, of worlds, is not finality, but transition? The Watchers may not erase in cruelty, but in design, carrying forward what is essential and discarding the rest. To us it looks like extinction. To them it may look like evolution. But if that is true, then why does it feel so cold? Why does silence feel like abandonment instead of guidance? Here is where the weight becomes unbearable. To not know the intention of the Watchers is to live every day in uncertainty. Are we loved or dismissed? Protected or neglected? Tested or condemned? Our actions are not answers, only questions echoing upward, and the silence of the sky does not return them. At times, I think of the Watchers as archivists, keeping shelves upon shelves of civilizations, each stored, studied, then forgotten. But at other times they feel like something worse, predators who savour the watching as much as the consuming. To a predator, the delay before the strike is not patience but pleasure. Are we prey extended the courtesy of ignorance, or students awaiting our final grade? The haunting part is this. Perhaps we cannot tell the difference until it is too late. Both predator and teacher watch in silence. Both archivist and executioner study before acting. From the ground where we stand, the gaze looks the same, and so I am left staring at our world with new eyes. The skyscrapers gleaming in twilight, the streets alive with laughter, the children running under fading daylight, all of it fragile, all of it dependent on whether those eyes above decide the story continues or ends. The weight of knowing we may not be authors of our own survival is a weight almost too heavy to bear. Which leads me back to the sharpest edge of the thought. If the lights are already dimming, then perhaps the final act has already begun, and we simply do not recognise it yet. The words linger like smoke, trapped in the lungs, impossible to release. If the last act is already in motion, then our blindness is the cruelest part. Actors on a stage rarely know which scene will be their last. They perform, they speak their lines, they move with confidence, never realising the curtain is about to drop. And maybe that is what humanity is doing now, performing without realising the play is almost over. This thought struck me hardest when I found myself standing in an open field, far from the noise of cities, far from the hum of machines. Night had settled like a vast black ocean, and the stars pressed down like cold eyes. I had been searching for silence, but what I found was something else entirely. For in the distance, across that dark emptiness, lights began to appear. Not stars, not planes, but orbs glowing softly, shifting, pulsing in ways no natural light should move. At first I told myself they were tricks of the eye, illusions born of exhaustion. But as I watched, the lights began to arrange themselves. Patterns formed, then dissolved, then reformed, as though the sky itself was speaking in a language I could not understand. My chest tightened. The world around me grew impossibly still, as though even the insect and wind had paused to listen. The lights pulsed once more, then vanished, leaving only the familiar stars above. And then, in the middle of the empty field, I saw the lights. That moment changed everything, because in that instant the watchers were no longer a theory, no longer a question of if, but a presence that made itself known. And yet, they did not descend, did not speak. They revealed themselves only enough to remind me, and perhaps all of us, that they are there, always there, and that their silence is not absence but intention. The experience left me shaking, my thoughts collapsing in on themselves. If those lights were the watchers, then why show themselves at all? Was it a warning, a reassurance, or simply a reminder that the performance continues under their gaze? I realised then that the most terrifying part of being observed is not knowing the motive of the observer. Surveillance without context is a prison without walls. This was the climax of dread, the spike of realisation. They are not distant, not abstract. They are here, and they are watching now. Every excuse of coincidence, every denial of possibility crumbled in that field. Whatever I saw was deliberate. Whatever revealed itself did so with purpose. Psychologically, the weight of that moment has not left me. At night, when shadows stretch across my room, I find myself searching for flickers of light, listening for silence that feels too heavy, wondering if the watchers linger not only in the sky, but just beyond perception, testing how much fear we can hold before we break. And the question that claws at me is this. If they reveal themselves only in fragments, only in glimpses, does that mean they are preparing us for something greater? Or is it simply their way of reminding us that the curtain is closer than we think? I cannot shake the image of those lights in the field. They were not chaotic. They were precise, deliberate. They moved with a rhythm that suggested intention. That memory follows me into every waking moment, as though etched not only into my eyes but into my soul. And so the story takes its sharpest turn yet. The watchers are not a distant mystery drifting among the stars. They are already here, close enough to be seen, close enough to remind us of their presence. And then, in the middle of the empty field, I saw the lights. That single memory has burned itself into me like a scar, refusing to fade no matter how much time passes. I replay it endlessly, searching for flaws, for reasons, for some rational anchor to hold on to. But there is none. The lights were real. The silence was real. And what followed, the unease that seeped into me, as was more than fear, it was recognition. Recognition that the Watchers are not myth or speculation. They are here. Since that night the world has not looked the same. The ordinary carries shadows it never carried before. The hum of streetlights feels deliberate. The flicker of reflections on glass like coded signals. Even silence itself feels heavier, as though each quiet room is a chamber in which I am observed. And what unsettles me most is not the possibility of contact, but the absence of it. To reveal themselves only through fragments, only through glimpses, is to remind us of their power without offering clarity. It is a game of silence, one in which we are the only ones who cannot refuse to play. The pace slows here, but not the unease. I find myself drawn to small details, the things I once ignored, the patterns of birds shifting suddenly in the sky, the moments when technology fails without reason, the strange weight of dreams that feel less like imagination and more like intrusion. These fragments accumulate, and though each is insignificant alone, together they paint a picture I cannot escape. The Watchers are not distant observers. They are already woven into the fabric of our daily lives, and if that is true, then what are they waiting for? Their silence is no longer the silence of distance but of restraint, like someone holding their breath in the dark waiting to see what their subject will do next. Perhaps the lights I saw in that field were not meant for me alone but for all of us, a message sent across countless eyes. We are here and we are watching. The most terrifying part of living with that memory is not fear of death, but fear of irrelevance. If the Watchers are truly judging us, then our greatest terror may not be destruction, but dismissal. To be erased, not with anger, not with punishment, but with indifference, as though we were never worth the effort of survival. That is the coldest silence of all. And yet, there are moments when I wonder if the Watchers are not cruel, but cautious. Perhaps they reveal themselves in fragments because too much exposure would shatter us. Imagine a child seeing the ocean for the first time, or quickly turns to fear when the waves rise higher than comprehension allows. Perhaps humanity is that child, staring into an ocean too vast to grasp, and the Watchers are careful not to drown us in its depths. Still, the shadows remain. I walk among people who laugh, argue, and dream, and I want to ask them, don't you feel it too? The weight pressing against the air, the silence that feels too heavy to be empty. Are you blind, or are you simply refusing to see? Because once you see, you cannot return. The curtain never closes once you glimpse what stands behind it. The lights in the field remain the anchor point of my life, a marker dividing the time before and after. Before, there was speculation, theory, mystery. After, there is only knowledge, not complete, not clear, but undeniable, and knowledge itself is a burden. For once you know you are watched, every action becomes a question, every breath a test. And the silence of the Watchers presses closer with every passing day, asking a question we may not be able to answer. The phrase lingers like a riddle whispered through centuries, a question not asked in words but carved into the very fabric of our existence. It presses against me at odd hours, when I least expect it, in the quiet of a library, in the hum of a train, in the soft rustle of leaves at night. What is it the Watchers want to know from us? What test lies beneath the silence of their gaze? At first, I thought the question was simple. Are we worthy of survival? But survival is too crude, too obvious. If their intent were only to measure survival, they would not need such patience. We have survived wars, famines, plagues. We have risen from ashes countless times. No, the question must be deeper. Perhaps it is not about whether we can endure, but about how we endure. Do we cling only to power, or do we create meaning beyond it? Do we build for ourselves alone, or do we create something that resonates beyond the span of our short lives? The unease sharpens when I consider that perhaps we are not being measured as individuals, or even as a species, but as storytellers. Every civilization leaves stories behind, painted on walls, carved into stone, written into books. And the watchers, if they exist, might be listening not only to our actions, but to our narratives. What story are we telling with our existence? Is it a story of destruction, or one of creation? Is it tragedy, comedy, or something we do not yet have words for? This possibility unsettles me in ways I cannot describe, because if we are being judged on the story we tell, then silence becomes part of the verdict. Every genocide, every war, every betrayal is not only an act, but a line in our script. Every kindness, every sacrifice, every act of love is another line the watchers are reading, and when the story no longer holds meaning for them, perhaps that is when the curtain falls. I think again of the lights I saw in the field. They pulsed like signals, not random, not chaotic. What if that was their question? Spoken not in words, but in patterns of light. A question too vast for language, too simple for us to answer. Maybe they were asking, what are you becoming? And maybe my silence, my awe, my trembling in the dark was already an answer, recorded and weighed. Psychologically, this thought has changed the way I move through the world. Every gesture feels monumental, every moment charged with meaning. A smile offered to a stranger, a cruel word spoken in haste. All feel as though they ripple outward beyond Earth into some vast cosmic ledger. It is not paranoia exactly, but something heavier. The sense that life itself has always been theatre, and the audience is not human. And yet, another layer of fear creeps in. What if the question is not about us at all? What if it is about them? What if, by watching us, they are searching for an answer to their own silence, their own despair, their own long journey across the dark? In that sense, we may not be the students, but the mirror, the reflection they are searching in, to see themselves more clearly. And if we fail, what then? Does the mirror shatter, or do they simply turn away, leaving us to collapse in our own shadows? The thought grows unbearable at times, that the watchers do not need us, but we desperately need them. Their silence, their distance, their occasional flickers of light. These things have come to shape our fears, our myths, our very sense of existence. To live without their gaze now feels impossible. And so, the question grows sharper still. If they are asking something we cannot answer, then perhaps our fate is already decided, written in the silence of a question left forever hanging. That sentence does not feel like speculation anymore. It feels like prophecy. If our destiny has already been inscribed, then all our striving, all our struggles, are not battles for survival, but performances for meaning. We walk through the motions believing we can alter the outcome, yet the watchers may have chosen long before we were capable of choosing anything at all. I think of how many times humanity has faced the brink. The volcanic winters, the pandemics, the wars that nearly swallowed continents whole. Each time, survival felt like triumph, but what if it was simply allowance? What if the watchers permitted us to continue, not because we deserved to, but because the question they were asking had not yet been answered? We may see progress, they may see only unfinished data. This realization turns every detail of existence into something uncanny. The small things, the things too mundane to matter, perhaps they matter most. The way we treat animals, the way we tend to our environment, the way we mourn the dead and celebrate the living. These patterns, seemingly trivial, may be the lines that fill the margins of the cosmic ledger. When I sit in a cafe and watch strangers greet each other with warmth or cruelty, I wonder if those moments weigh more heavily than all our scientific achievements. Maybe the question has never been about power or invention. Maybe it has always been about heart. And yet, the dread thickens. Because what if heart is not enough? What if compassion, kindness and love mean little to watchers who measure on a scale beyond morality, beyond emotion. Their silence could mean our greatest virtues are irrelevant, that the things we cling to as evidence of our worth are nothing more than noise in the data they collect. Sometimes I dream of archives, infinite halls where civilizations are stored, each hall lined with shelves of light, each shelf a world preserved not in its glory but in its last moments. I see humanity's shelf glowing faintly, not yet extinguished, but dimming, waiting for the hand that will decide whether to keep or to erase. The dream ends with the sound of footsteps echoing through the hall, steady and unhurried, as if the decision-maker has already begun to walk toward us. The psychological strain of carrying this thought is immense. It fractures the mind into two selves, one that clings to hope, another that surrenders to inevitability. The hopeful self imagines that the watchers are caretakers, that their patience is not cruelty but mercy. The despairing self whispers that the watchers are archivists of endings, not guardians of continuance, and I am caught between them, torn by silence that offers no answer. Still I return to the field, to the lights I saw. I remember their rhythm, their deliberate pulse. They were not random. They spoke in silence, and though I could not understand, I felt the meaning beneath. Perhaps it was not a warning. Perhaps it was simply acknowledgement, a way of saying, we see you still. Your story continues for now, but for now is not forever. And if our fate is already decided, then maybe the lights that night were not reassurance but a final glance before the curtain falls. Like the closing of a book, like the fading of a song, inevitable, irreversible. Which leaves me with a thought that chills me more than all others. Perhaps the watchers are not deciding whether we survive, but only how we end. That thought pierces deeper than all the others, because it reframes the silence above us as not uncertainty, but inevitability. If survival is no longer the question, then the true test lies in the manner of our conclusion. Will it be fire or silence, sudden or slow, a single event that swallows us whole, or a long unravelling that leaves us barely aware the curtain has already fallen? History becomes darker through this lens. The disappearance of entire peoples takes on a new shape. The Maya, whose calendars ended abruptly, not with explanation, but with mystery. The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon, who built vast cities, aligned with the stars only to vanish as though the desert swallowed them. To us their endings are puzzles. To the watchers they may have been experiments concluded, performances halted mid-act, their stories deemed sufficient and ended with precision. The third great twist begins to take form here. We were not the first to notice them, and we will not be the first to vanish. Evidence lies scattered in myths, in ruins, in stories told by voices long silenced. Civilizations before us may have reached their moment of contact, their moment of awareness, just as we are reaching ours now. And perhaps that awareness was the final step, the signal that the test was complete, that the time for observation had passed, and the time for erasure had begun. What chills me most is the thought that the watchers do not need to destroy us directly. They only need to shift the balance. A change in weather, a failure of crops, a plague released at the perfect time. All could look like natural disaster, while in truth being judgment disguised as chance. If they have acted before, their fingerprints are invisible because they wear the mask of nature itself. Erasure not as war, not as conquest, but as inevitability. The psychology of this realization corrodes the edges of hope. To think of death as natural is one thing, to think of it as chosen is another. We are like characters in a book whose ending has already been written, unaware of the page where the story stops. That ignorance, perhaps, is the only mercy the watchers allow us. And yet, a more terrifying thought intrudes. What if some did know? What if ancient civilizations recognized their watchers at the end, saw them in the skies, felt their presence in the silence, and recorded their fear in myths that we now dismiss as allegory? What if the tales of gods descending in fury, of stars falling, of voices speaking from the heavens were not metaphors but memories of the moment the curtain fell on them? If so, then their warnings were never myths. They were desperate messages, passed forward in time to us, in the hope that we might understand before it was too late. The Sahara speaks again in this context, a region once fertile, flowing with water, supporting cities that vanished without trace, now buried beneath endless sand. Did its people feel the eyes above them? Did they sense that their time was ending? Was the desert not born of climate alone, but of choice? A choice made by those who decide how worlds are shaped, how civilizations are erased. The weight of this twist is almost unbearable. We are not the first to be tested, and we will not be the last. Our awareness now places us in the same position as those who came before, standing on the edge of judgment, unsure if we are still part of the performance or already walking toward the exit, and so the question sharpens with new teeth. If others were erased, and their warnings became our myths, what role are we playing now in the endless cycle of observation and silence? The question echoes through me like a bell in an empty cathedral, resonating long after the sound should have faded. If we are not the first to be watched, then we are actors in a performance that has been staged countless times before. Each civilization, each species that rose and fell, may have carried the same question, spoken in different tongues, painted on different walls, prayed to different gods, and yet all arriving at the same silence. I think about the ruins of forgotten peoples and wonder. Were they too asking this question in their final days? Did they know they were performing for unseen eyes, or did the watchers wait until awareness dawned before delivering the final act? It chills me to imagine that our role now is not to survive, not to flourish, but to complete a script already written, a script whose ending we will not understand until it swallows us. The third great twist sharpens further here. Humanity may not be a single experiment but part of a sequence. We are not the first to be watched, nor the only ones. Across the galaxy, perhaps across thousands of worlds, other civilizations have been observed, measured, judged and erased. Each one a data point, each one another performance in an endless cycle of trials. To them, our Earth is not unique but one of many. And the role we play now is not special. It is statistical. That realization cuts deeper than the threat of destruction. To be unique is at least a matter. To be one of many, repeating the same pattern, is to be diminished into irrelevance. Our wars, our art, our triumphs, our struggles, all may be nothing more than variations on a theme the watchers have seen 1,000 times before. They watch, not in fascination, but in confirmation. We are a paragraph in a library so vast that no single volume stands out. And yet, a paradox grips me. If we are one of many, then perhaps the true role we play is not in survival, but in deviation. What if the experiment is to see whether we break the pattern? What if the test is not whether we live, but whether we live differently? Every other civilization may have collapsed under its own weight, turned inward, consumed itself. Perhaps our role is to escape that fate, to prove that cycles can be broken, that endings are not inevitable. But how does one prove uniqueness to an intelligence that has seen countless worlds? Perhaps that is why silence is their greatest tool. By saying nothing, they force us to reveal ourselves. By withholding answers, they force us to create them. Our response to the silence, our creativity, our madness, our cruelty, our compassion, becomes the performance. The watchers do not need to intervene. They need only to observe what emerges when we realize the stage is real. The psychology of this realization twists like a knife. It means that every generation carries the burden of performance. Every war is not only war, but part of the script. Every song is not only song, but part of the judgment. Each individual, each choice, threads itself into the larger story that the watchers are reading. And the silence above us is not ignorance. It is the sound of the audience listening. And so the question becomes unbearable in its weight. Are we destined to end as all others have, or are we meant to break free? And if breaking free is possible, what does it require? Sacrifice? Unity? Or something we have not yet conceived? The thought claws at me. leaving me raw with dread and awe alike. If others were erased, and if we are now repeating their steps, then the real question is whether we will collapse into their silence, or write a story the watchers have never seen before. The words weigh heavier than stone, for they suggest that the stage is not yet closed, that the script is still being written. But how does one write a story different enough to matter in the eyes of beings who have watched countless worlds rise and vanish? What could possibly surprise an audience so ancient, so patient, so unyielding? The thought gnaws at me as I wander through the ruins of old cities. Each broken column, each shattered statue, is a reminder that humans have always believed they were exceptional, only to fall like every empire before them. Rome believed it eternal. The Maya believed their gods favoured them. The Egyptians built monuments meant to last forever, yet forever ended, and the silence swallowed them whole. If their stories did not move the watchers, what chance do ours have? And yet, we live in an age unlike any before. Our reach extends beyond the ground beneath our feet. We send machines into the void, whispering across the solar system. We split atoms, harness stars, and dream of settling other worlds. Perhaps this is the part of the story that has not been seen before. Not the rise of another empire, but the moment when life attempts to leave its cradle. Could it be that the watchers are waiting to see if we take that step? If we prove that our story is not confined to a single world, but stretches into the stars themselves? But what if reaching for the stars is not the test, but the trap? Perhaps every civilization before us tried the same, building towers of steel, sending fire into the heavens, only to be erased before they could expand too far. If the watchers are curators, they may not want their subjects escaping the exhibit. We may think space is freedom, but to them it could be trespass. The paradox gnaws at me. Does our survival depend on reaching beyond Earth, or on staying within it? Every step forward could be either proof of worth or proof of danger. Every invention could be either salvation or evidence against us. And the silence above offers no guidance, only the heavy weight of being observed. The psychological strain of this duality is crushing. To live believing every act may be judged in ways we cannot comprehend is to live suspended between awe and terror. I find myself watching people differently now. The kindness of a stranger helping another across the street. The cruelty of a voice raised in anger. These small things may be more important than rockets or machines. Perhaps the watchers do not care how far we travel, but how we treat one another when the journey grows hard. Yet I return to the lights in the field, to the precision with which they pulsed and vanished. That was no accident. It was communication, but not in any language we understand. Perhaps that was the test itself, to see if we could recognize intention where others saw only coincidence, to see if we would dismiss or if we would understand. If so, then maybe every strange event in our skies has been part of the same question, whispered again and again. Do you see us yet? And so the tension builds without release. We live in a world that could be erased in an instant, yet also one that could rise into something greater than we can imagine. The watchers remain silent, patient, unyielding, and we, fragile actors on this stage, continue to perform, unsure if we're moving toward survival or toward silence. Which leaves me with a haunting thought. Perhaps the watchers are not waiting for us to change, but simply for us to reveal who we already are. That thought unsettles me more than the idea of destruction, because it means the verdict may already be visible, written not in the future but in the present. If the watchers are only holding a mirror to us, then everything we do has already answered the question, and the answer may not be the one we want. Look closely at the world today, and what reflection does it give? Nations arm themselves to the teeth, preparing for wars they hope will never come. Wealth pools in the hands of the few, while billions struggle to survive. Forests burn, seas rise, species vanish. If this is who we are when revealed, then what judgment could be expected but silence? The silence of dismissal, the silence of an audience walking away from a play they have seen too many times before. And yet, The other side of the mirror shows something else, acts of compassion that go unnoticed in history's grand sweep. Hands held in grief, songs sung in joy, strangers helping one another with no hope of reward. These moments, fleeting as they are, reveal another truth, that humanity is not one story but two, one of cruelty and destruction, one of beauty and connection. Which one will the watchers see as the truth? Or do they weigh them both, balancing darkness against light, waiting to see which tips the scale? The paradox deepens. If our story is already revealed, then perhaps the watchers are not testing us, but simply recording the outcome. Surveillance not as judgment, but as documentation. We may not be actors in a performance, but subjects in an experiment. Our every action logged and stored as data in some incomprehensible archive. If that is true, then the watchers do not need to decide anything. Our story ends when it ends, and they remain only collectors of endings. But then comes the more chilling thought. What if they are not simply recording, but learning? What if each civilization, each rise and fall, is part of their education, and we, like those before us, are teaching them something they cannot find within themselves? In that case, our role is not only performance but sacrifice, our struggles feeding into a knowledge that will outlast us. And if that is true, then perhaps the very act of being watched has already changed us, shaping us into what they require. The psychology of this realization is unbearable at times. To live knowing that your life may be nothing more than an entry in a record you will never see. It strips away the illusion of meaning, and yet it also grants a strange kind of purpose. If every action matters, if every kindness or cruelty is a line in the record, then perhaps meaning does not come from surviving, but from what is remembered, even if the memory belongs only to them. I return again to the lights in the field, to their deliberate rhythm. They were not chaotic. They were not random. They were observation made visible, a signal that said, "We are here, we are watching, continue." It was both terrifying and strangely intimate, like knowing the universe itself has turned its gaze upon you. And so, I wonder, if the watchers are waiting for us to reveal who we truly are, then perhaps the test is not whether we survive, but whether we can look into the mirror and accept what we see. To face ourselves without illusion, without excuse. Perhaps only then will the final act begin. Which leaves me haunted by a single, cutting thought. What if the reflection is already complete, and the curtain is waiting only for the moment they choose to drop it? The question circles me like a predator, patient and unblinking. If the reflection is already fixed, then the choices we make now may be nothing more than echoes, ripples on water whose surface has already stilled. That thought brings a suffocating kind of dread, as though every step forward is only walking toward a door already locked. And yet I cannot let it rest there, because if the reflection is complete, then why are we still here? Why allow the curtain to hang in place at all, if not for some unfinished line in the story? Perhaps the watchers delay not out of hesitation, but out of precision, waiting for the exact moment when the play reaches its conclusion, when the actors have delivered their final line. The silence, then, is not indecision, but timing. History is filled with such timing. The sudden collapse of empires that seemed unstoppable, the volcanic eruption that buried Pompeii without warning, the wave that consumed entire coastlines. Each event arrived not gradually, but with precision, like a blade dropped at the exact moment it was meant to fall. Was that the curtain descending, or just rehearsal for the ending, yet to come? The twist grows sharper. Perhaps the watchers do not erase civilizations arbitrarily, but when their stories reach inevitability, when the reflection of who they are can no longer change, that would mean our story is not over because our mirror has not yet hardened. We're still fluid, still in flux, still capable of becoming something else. That possibility both terrifies and comforts me. If this is true, then the silence is not cruelty but allowance. The watchers do not speak because to speak would alter the outcome. To warn us would make us into something else, into something not truly ourselves. and so they remain silent, waiting to see if we will destroy ourselves as those before us did, or if we will write a story that shifts the pattern. The psychology of this is unbearable. It means the responsibility lies entirely with us. There will be no saviour descending from the stars, no guidance from above, only silence, patient and merciless. And within that silence, every act becomes a choice in the story. Every cruelty a nail in the coffin, every kindness a spark in the dark. I recall the lights again, their rhythm deliberate, undeniable. Perhaps that was not guidance, not even acknowledgement, but confirmation. You see us now. Continue as you are. It was both chilling and liberating. Because if they see us, then we cannot pretend anymore that we are unobserved. And yet the script remains in our hands. The silence is both a prison and a freedom. What does that mean for us now? Perhaps it means that the reflection is not complete after all, but that we stand at the edge of its final shape. The watchers may already know the outcome, but we do not. And so we perform, blind to whether our story will end in silence or in something greater. That blindness is cruel, but it is also the essence of our humanity. And so I'm left with a question that feels heavier than all others before it. If this is the last chance, the last moment before the curtain falls, what must we do, or refuse to do, to change the reflection in the mirror? The words feel less like a question and more like a blade held against our collective throat. Because if the watcher's silence is not absence but patience, then the weight of choice falls entirely on us. The story's ending belongs not to them but to humanity, and what we choose in this fragile window may decide whether we join the archive of erased civilizations or carve a new path unseen before. I walk at night and look up at the stars, each one a distant flame that may already be extinguished, its light travelling toward us long after its death. It strikes me as an omen, that we too may already be gone in the eyes of the watchers, our story finished, even as we continue to speak. If the mirror has already hardened, then these final gestures are nothing but the motions of actors whose lines have been written. But if not, then perhaps we are still at the fulcrum, still at the moment when one word, one act, one choice could tilt the balance of everything. What then must we do? The answer does not lie in rockets or machines, nor in the conquest of new worlds. If every civilization before us reached for the stars and was erased, then the test is not about where we go, but who we are when we try. The watchers may not care if we colonize Mars or sail beyond Pluto. They may care only whether we learn to exist without devouring ourselves in the process. For what use is a species that can build worlds if it cannot live within one without tearing it apart? The more I dwell on it, the more I believe the test is simpler and more impossible than we imagine. It is not about technological triumphs, but moral ones. Not about whether we can rise higher, but whether we can rise together. Perhaps the watchers wait to see if we can break the oldest pattern of all, the endless cycle of division, greed, and self-destruction. Perhaps they do not need to strike us down, because history shows most civilizations collapse without interference. The silence is not a threat. It is a mirror, reflecting whether we choose to repeat or to transcend. But can humanity transcend? The question gnaws at me like a parasite. For every act of kindness I see, I also see cruelty amplified 1,000-fold. For every step forward, I see regression pulling us backward. If the reflection is to change, then it requires a shift so profound that it feels almost impossible. And yet impossibility may be the very point of the test. For what meaning would survival hold if it were easy? And then another possibility twists into my mind. What if the watchers are not external at all, but within us? Not beings in distant stars, but the awareness of being observed itself. A psychological experiment encoded into the human condition. This sense of being watched changes us, disciplines us, forces us to act with a shadow of accountability. Perhaps the watchers are not others, but the consciousness of our own reflection, forcing us to become better under the weight of imagined eyes. It is a terrifying thought, and yet also liberating. Because if the watchers are within, then the test has always been ours to pass. The silence is not theirs, but ours. The silence between what we could be and what we choose to be. The lights in the field may have been real, or they may have been a mirror too, a reminder that in the end the stage is ours, and the curtain falls only when we decide it should. And so the question sharpens to its most unbearable point. If this truly is the last chance, then do we have the courage to break the cycle? Or are we already rehearsing the same tragedy for the 1000th time? The question rattles in my skull like a stone against glass, threatening to shatter every comforting illusion. History's weight presses down like an unrelenting tide, whispering that the answer has always been no. Civilizations rise, they burn bright, and then they fall, often by their own hand. If the Watchers exist, how many times have they seen this same performance? How many times have they waited, hoping, only to witness the same collapse repeated in endless variations? I think of the ruins scattered across the earth, the empty temples of Angkor, the broken statues of Easter Island, the lost cities buried beneath jungles and deserts. We study them, trying to extract lessons, but we rarely ask the deeper question. What if these civilizations weren't just lost to themselves, but to something greater? What if the Watchers stood by as they destroyed themselves, recording the fall as silent as ever? If that's true, then we are only the latest iteration of a test humanity doesn't even know it's taking. And yet, the possibility of breaking the cycle burns in me, because the Watcher's silence could mean more than indifference. It could mean possibility. A kind of pause, a space where the final act has not yet been written. We still move, still choose, still exist. Perhaps that is the greatest mercy of all, that we are not erased yet, that we still have the chance, however fragile, to become something different. But how? How does a species so entrenched in division and violence find its way out? I find myself haunted by smaller moments, details that rarely make the annals of history. A stranger shielding another from harm, a doctor working through exhaustion to save a patient, a community rebuilding after disaster. These are the fragments that suggest the story may still turn, that compassion is not a weakness, but a force more enduring than conquest. Maybe the Watchers are not waiting for miracles of technology, but for miracles of empathy. Still, doubt gnaws at me. What if the Watchers do not care about kindness, only about survival? Perhaps all that matters to them is whether a civilization can endure without collapsing, and if that is the measure, then our reflection looks bleak. Climate unravelling, weapons growing deadlier, lies spreading faster than truth. The mirror shows cracks deepening, and perhaps those cracks are already too wide to heal. If survival is the test, then perhaps we have already failed, and the silence is only the countdown to erasure. But another twist pierces me. What if the Watchers do not erase civilizations at all? What if we erase ourselves, and they merely observe? In that case, the curtain is not theirs to drop. It is ours. The silence is not a looming threat, but a stage we ourselves burn down. That realization is more horrifying than intervention, because it means there is no enemy but us. Every war, every act of greed, every blind exploitation of the world is another hand pulling the curtain down faster. The Watchers do not need to act. They only need to watch. And yet, if that is true, then we also hold the power to stop it. The silence may be unbearable, but it is also permission. Permission to rewrite the ending, to refuse the pattern. Perhaps that is the one thing no other civilization has done. If the Watchers are waiting for something new, then maybe it isn't power or brilliance. Maybe it's restraint, the strength to not repeat the script. I find myself standing again in memory, watching the lights pulse in the empty field. Their rhythm did not change, no matter how I stared. It was steady, patient, eternal, as if reminding me that time is both infinite and short, and that the choice must be made before the mirror hardens into finality. And so the question sharpens further still. Are we capable of writing a new ending, or are we condemned to repeat the old one forever? The words echo like a tolling bell, each vibration resonating through history's chambers. It is not only a question of destiny, but of memory, of whether we even recognise the patterns that bind us. For how can we break free of a cycle we refuse to admit exists? The ruins of vanished worlds whisper that denial is the first step toward collapse. They did not believe their end was inevitable, and perhaps that very blindness sealed them. I think of the ancient Maya, who tracked the stars with a precision that still amazes, yet could not prevent their kingdoms from fracturing. I think of Rome, whose legions once marched without resistance, only to crumble beneath the weight of internal decay. Each one might have believed they stood apart from the others, that their brilliance exempted them from the fate of those before. But the Watchers, if they exist, must have seen it all as a repetition, the same melody in different keys rising and falling endlessly. And so the thought strikes me. Maybe the true challenge is not technological or even moral, but imaginative. To see beyond the familiar story and write something entirely new. To refuse the script that whispers collapse as inevitability. This may be why the Watchers remain silent. If they intervened, we would only mirror their choices instead of finding our own. The silence forces us to imagine for ourselves, to create an ending that has never been seen before. But do we have the courage? Do we even have the vision? The psychology of the cycle is treacherous. Humans cling to familiarity, even when familiarity leads to ruin. It is easier to repeat than to reinvent. That is why history so often feels like déjà vu. But the lights in the field remind me of something else, that even in repetition, there can be disruption. Their rhythm was steady, but within it, I swore I saw subtle variations, tiny shifts invisible unless you stared long enough. Perhaps the Watchers are not waiting for grand revolutions, but for subtle deviations, a civilization that chooses differently in moments that seem small, but ripple outward into transformation. And then another possibility unsettles me. What if the Watchers themselves are trapped in a cycle? What if their role is not omnipotence but repetition? To watch, record and erase, over and over, unable to break the pattern, themselves? If so, then humanity's choice is not just about survival, but about liberating the Watchers from their endless script as well. The silence may not be authority, but longing. They may wait for us not as judges, but as companions, desperate for a story that does not end in the same ashes. That idea terrifies me even more than judgment, because it means the responsibility is even greater. We do not carry only our own fate, but the possibility of breaking a cycle that stretches across stars and ages. If we fail, then the Watchers will continue their role forever, condemned as much as we are. But if we succeed, if we find the courage to choose differently, then we may not only save ourselves but transform the silence into dialogue at last. I find myself asking questions that have no answers, yet burn with urgency. What would it mean to step outside the cycle? Would it mean renouncing violence entirely? Would it mean embracing unity even when division feels inevitable? Or would it mean something subtler, like choosing restraint when power is within our grasp? The Watchers may not care which form it takes, only that it is new, that it diverges from the old reflection. The lights return in my memory, steady, eternal, patient. They seemed different at first, but now I wonder, were they not indifferent at all, but hopeful? Were they waiting to see if we, could read the pattern, could feel the weight of silence not as abandonment but as invitation? The thought lingers, heavy and luminous, as I realise that the curtain has not yet fallen, which means the final act is still unwritten. That thought chills me and comforts me all at once. To know that nothing is sealed yet is both liberating and terrifying, because the burden of authorship falls squarely on us. We are not only the audience of history, we are its playwrights, fumbling with quills that drip with both hope and violence. Every decision we make becomes a line in the script, and one day that script will be read by those who come after, if anyone comes after at all. I cannot stop thinking about how fragile the boundary is between endurance and collapse. A single misstep, a single unchecked ambition can tilt an entire civilization toward ruin. But then again, a single act of compassion, A single refusal to follow the old path of destruction could just as easily redirect the course. Perhaps this is why the Watchers, if they are real, remain unmoving. They know how fine the line is. They know intervention would erase the chance for us to prove that fragility can also be strength. The silence, then, is not absence. It is expectation. And expectations are heavier than threats. A threat you can fight, resist, push against. Expectation you must live up to, and it lives within you like a mirror you cannot shatter. I wonder how many of us can feel it. Do others sense that weight? Or am I cursed alone with its gravity? Perhaps every human does, in quiet moments, and they ask themselves if they could have acted differently. Perhaps the Watchers are not only looking outward, but through us, searching for that flicker of awareness. Still, fear gnaws at me. If the final act is unwritten, then so too is the ending of our kind. And endings can come swiftly, without grandeur, without warning. A meteor, a war, a silence too deep to climb out of. I think of how fragile memory is, how easily erased. What if even our knowledge of the Watchers is someday lost? What if the lights in the field become nothing more than myth, a forgotten story told once around fires before vanishing into dust? Would the cycle begin again without us ever realizing it? The philosophical weight grows heavier the more I carry it. I imagine civilizations before us, perhaps far greater, who also felt the possibility of breaking free. Maybe they too stared into strange lights pulsing in the night sky. Maybe they too wondered if they were capable of writing something new. But if they failed, if they fell into ruin, then perhaps they are the ruins we walk upon now. Their failure becomes our lesson, if only we are willing to read it. And yet, maybe the Watchers left them, and us, not with answers but with tools. Silence is one, time is another, reflection, even in despair, is a third. These are not grand gifts, but they are enough. Enough to shift a choice at the crucial moment. Enough to make the difference between ashes and continuity. Perhaps all we need is to believe that silence is not abandonment, but a test of our willingness to imagine something better than what came before. Still, the unease remains. I return in my mind to the steady lights, their unbroken rhythm. They seemed eternal, and in their steadiness I sensed a kind of longing, though I cannot explain why. It was as if they were saying, "We are here, but we cannot write this for you. That is your role. That is your burden. And maybe, just maybe, that is the invitation we've always overlooked. If the final act is still unwritten, then perhaps it waits not for a miracle, but for a decision made in silence, unseen by all, yet echoing across eternity. And that decision may not come from leaders, or armies, or monuments. It may come from a single mind, a single choice, carried forward until it reshapes the whole. So I ask myself and I ask you in this moment where silence weighs heavier than sound, what if the ending depends not on all of us but on you? The words coil in my mind like a serpent, quiet yet venomous, for they strip away the comfort of anonymity. It is easy to think humanity's fate rests in vast systems, in the machinery of governments or the inertia of history. But what if it doesn't? What if every cycle, every collapse, every salvation has hinged on the hidden choice of one single person, unnoticed at the time but echoing afterward with irreversible force? That thought reshapes everything I've believed about the Watchers. Perhaps they were never looking at us collectively, but at individuals, at me, at you, at those whose decisions become the unseen hinges of history. When I first saw the lights, I assumed they represented power beyond comprehension. But what if they were not symbols of authority at all, but of witness? What if their true role is not to control or destroy, but to hold us accountable, to remind us silently that our smallest choices matter more than we dare admit? The silence would then be a mirror, not a void. It reflects back our decisions, amplifying them until they reverberate across centuries. I think of the lone scholar who preserves a manuscript, the unknown soldier who refuses an order, the nameless mother who chooses to protect rather than abandon. History rarely records them, yet history bends around them like light through glass. Could it be that the watchers are waiting for such moments, for such souls, to tip the balance of the cycle at last? But this leads to the final, most unsettling twist. What if the watchers are not external at all? What if they are projections of ourselves, scattered across time, sending warnings back like echoes from a future we have not yet lived? The lights in the field, the silence, the patterns. Perhaps they are not alien surveillance, but human remembrance. Perhaps we are both the observed and the observers, trapped in a dialogue with our own shadow across epochs. If that is true, then the message is stark. We, are telling us that collapse is not inevitable, but it is probable if we remain blind. The watchers are our descendants, our future selves, or fragments of civilizations that learn too late. They leave signs not because they wish to dominate, but because they are desperate for us to succeed where they failed. That would explain the silence. It is not command, but caution. If they shouted, we would obey, and obedience is not growth. Growth only comes when the choice is free. And then the image sharpens in my mind like glass catching moonlight. They hadn't left us clues. They had left us warnings. The lights were not decoration, they were alarm. The silence was not emptiness, it was restraint. Everything I had mistaken as distant or indifferent was in truth the most urgent of messages. We are on the brink of repeating the story, and they know it, but only we can stop it. This revelation crushes me and lifts me in the same breath, because it means the final act is still ours, not scripted, not stolen, not imposed from the sky. The watchers, whether alien or human echoes, have placed the weight of history in our hands. The cycle can be broken, but not by them. Only by us. Only by me. Only by you. The night feels heavier now, as if the air itself leans closer, listening to whether I will accept this burden or let it slide away. For the silence is no longer empty. It is a question, a demand, a plea. And I realise, with a certainty that shakes me, the next choice I make matters more than I will ever know. That thought lingers like smoke in the lungs, impossible to exhale. It is not just mine to bear, it belongs to all of us, each moving through our days with decisions that ripple outward in ways unseen. If history is a mirror, then every gesture, no matter how small, is part of the reflection that will eventually judge us. The watchers, whether they are real beings or shadows of ourselves, are only as powerful as the choices we make under their gaze. I walk under the stars and imagine the countless civilizations that might have stood here before us, on their own worlds, thinking themselves eternal. They too may have reached their pivotal moment, staring into silence, wondering if their choices mattered. And when they faltered, when they repeated the cycle, the watchers may have etched their story into the void, not to condemn them, but to warn us. Every failure becomes a warning, every collapse a signal flare across time. That is why the silence feels so alive. It is heavy with the weight of 1,000 lost voices. I wonder sometimes if the watchers envy us. If they are indeed echoes of what once was, then we still possess what they lost, the chance to decide differently. They can only look back. We can still look forward. They are bound to memory, while we remain bound to possibility. That makes our burden heavier, but also our gift rarer. For possibility is the most fragile and precious thing in the universe. It exists only in the present, only now. Once a choice is made, it hardens into history, and history is merciless. It would be easy to despair, to believe the cycle cannot be broken. After all, patterns are powerful. Gravity itself is a pattern. But then I think of the moments in human history where we did break patterns, where we rose above what seemed inevitable. We abolished empires, ended wars, healed wounds that once seemed eternal. It was never easy, and it was never perfect, but it proved something vital. Inevitability is an illusion. Patterns exist until they don't, and perhaps that is the true measure of a civilization's worth. Not how tall its towers rise, not how far its ships sail, not how long its dominion lasts, but whether it can look at the cycle written in stone and find the courage to carve a new path through it. Perhaps that is the test the Watchers wait for, not as judges but as kin. Because if even one civilization can break free, it changes the meaning of every story that came before. It redeems not only us but them. The desert of history is littered with bones, but even bones can speak if we know how to listen. The silence of the Watchers is not absence. It is the echo of all who came before, waiting for someone to answer differently. And if that answer must begin with one choice, one person, one act, then it can. The universe does not demand perfection. It demands the courage to begin. I close my eyes and feel the weight of that truth settle within me, not as despair, but as resolve. For the Watchers may be real, or they may be imagined, but the mirror is undeniable. Every step we take is a reflection. Every silence we break or prolong is a message. And the question remains, unyielding, merciless, but also strangely hopeful. Will we write the same ending, or dare to invent a new one? That question lingers like a blade, suspended above us, sharper than any prophecy and heavier than any truth. It is not an abstract thought. It is the living marrow of our existence, the silent choice folded into every heartbeat we carry. For if we are being watched, then what is being judged is not our intelligence, not our machines, not our monuments, but our willingness to do what no one before us has done, to escape the cycle of silence. I think of civilizations lost to time, of whispers buried beneath oceans, deserts, and collapsed skies. Did they too wonder if they were being observed? Did they mistake the silence of the cosmos for indifference, when it might have been the quiet patience of those who had already seen countless rises and falls? If so, then every fallen city, every extinct species, every vanished culture is not just history, it is a question mark etched into the void. And now the weight of the answer rests on us. Perhaps this is why the Watchers do not reveal themselves. To intervene is to rob us of choice, to strip away the dignity of self-determination. If they exist, they do not guide us because guidance is not the test, restraint is. For what is freedom, if not the power to fail? And what is destiny, if not the courage to walk blindly into it, knowing nothing is promised? So I return to the simplest of questions, the ones that echo louder the more they are repeated. If Oumuamua was not just a rock, what message did it carry? If Atlas is not just a comet, then what role does it play in the story of our survival? And if the universe is indeed alive with intelligence, then what must we become to stand among it? Not as warnings, not as ruins, but as equals. The sky above is black, yet not empty. It teems with silent witnesses, or perhaps only with the reflections of ourselves, magnified across time and distance. Either way, it is enough to remind me that we are not trivial. We are not a flicker destined to fade without consequence. Every civilization that fell before us mattered, and so will we. The only difference is whether our mattering will be written as a warning or as a dawn. So I leave you with these questions, as raw and unanswerable as the stars themselves. If Earth is under surveillance, what do the Watchers see when they look at us? Do they see children repeating the mistakes of countless ages, or do they see a species on the edge of something greater? Could it be that the silence is not condemnation, but anticipation, that they are waiting for us to take the step no one else has taken? And if the future of this story lies in our hands, will we have the courage to write it differently? Share your thoughts below, and if you're new here, subscribe to Planet Echoes for the next journey into the world's hidden history. For the silence is vast, but together we can learn to hear what waits within it,